Welcome, mystery lovers. In this story, we step into the world of Tommy and Tuppence, a pair whose wit and courage have made them unforgettable. Tell us where in the world you're listening from. It's always a joy to see how far these mysteries travel. If you enjoy these mysteries, don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support helps keep new cases coming. Now then, shall we begin? The rain had been falling since late afternoon, but by evening it had grown into a steady assault, hammering the slates of the laurels with a persistence that sounded almost personal. The laurels, snug though it was, did not entirely escape the complaints of weather. Windows rattled in their frames, the chimney groaned against the wind, and the garden gate beat itself into a tantrum. Indoors the lamps glowed with defiance, and the fire in the sitting room kept up a brave crackle against the onslaught. Tommy Beresford stretched his legs toward the hearthrug and regarded his wife with mock severity. "Wireless or chess?" he asked, as though they were two paths to destiny. Tuppence, perched neatly in her favourite armchair with a cushion tucked behind her back, lifted one eyebrow. "You always suggest chess on stormy nights. I think it's your excuse for losing without witnesses. The wireless, naturally." "Traitor," Tommy said, though without rancour. "One of these days I shall win a game." "You've been saying that since 1922, Tuppence replied, with a contented sigh. The fire cracked, the storm rattled, and Fritz the cat, sovereign of the laurels, leapt onto the window ledge, his tail flicking like a metronome of disapproval at the weather. Tuppence reached over to scratch behind his ears. Fritz tolerated it with the air of one bestowing a favour. The scene was domestic, ordinary, until the knock came. It was not polite, nor tentative. It was a pounding, hurried, desperate sound. Tommy half rose, exchanging a glance with Tuppence. For a moment, the storm itself seemed to pause as though listening. "Who in their senses would be out in this?" Tuppence murmured. "Someone without sense," Tommy said, and strode to the door. The moment he pulled it open, a gust of wind and rain flung itself inside, and with it, a man. Tall, gaunt, his coat plastered to his frame, his eyes wide with fear. He stumbled across the threshold and collapsed onto the hallway floor. "Good Lord!" Tommy exclaimed, crouching down. "Here! Steady! Steady!" The man's lips moved, forming words that carried no strength, only urgency. Tuppence, already kneeling at his side, leaned close. "They know your names," he whispered, the syllables breaking apart like the storm outside. Then he slumped forward. For a heartbeat, silence reigned, broken only by the hiss of rain through the open door and the uneasy growl of Fritz, arched and bristling as though sensing some unseen threat. Tommy shut the door with a thud, sealing out the storm. We'd better get him to the sofa. Between them, they managed to heave the stranger into the sitting room. He was not light, though his body felt unnervingly insubstantial, as though fear and exhaustion had hollowed him out. His coat, once expensive, was worn at the cuffs. His boots, foreign in cut, left muddy prints across the rug. Tuppence eased him onto the cushions. "Fetch a blanket, Tommy. He's soaked through." Tommy hurried, returning with one of their best woolens. They wrapped the man, noting his pallor and the lines etched deep into his face. His hand clutched something, a small leather notebook, damp but intact. Even in unconsciousness, his grip refused to loosen. Tuppence's eyes lingered on it. Not the usual accessory for a house call. "We'll see what the doctor has to say first." Tommy straightened. "I'll telephone Dr. Harding." The storm rattled the windows again as Tommy left the room. Tuppence stayed, watching the stranger's face in the firelight. He was foreign, certainly. An accent had touched his brief words. Central European, perhaps. His cheekbones were sharp, his lips colourless. Yet it was his expression that unsettled her most. Even unconscious, fear clung to him like a shadow. Fritz leapt from the sill and landed with silent grace beside the sofa, his yellow eyes fixed on the man. The cat's tail twitched, his whiskers stiff. Tuppence stroked him, but Fritz did not relax. He hissed softly, as if warning her of something invisible. The telephone bell shrilled. Tommy returned a moment later. "Harding's coming," though he grumbled about the weather and hinted we were soft-hearted fools. "That we may be," Tuppence said quietly, "but a man does not stumble into our home and whisper warnings without cause." Tommy poured a glass of brandy and tried to coax a sip past the stranger's lips. A few drops went down, but the man barely stirred. His fingers clamped tighter around the notebook. Extraordinary, Tommy muttered. Even unconscious, he clings to it. Tuppence leaned closer. Do you think he meant us, Tommy? Our names? Her husband hesitated, then gave a half shrug. Could have been delirium, but I'll admit, it was singularly specific. They exchanged a look, one that recalled past adventures, the war, secret missions, narrow escapes. Once, long ago, they had agreed to leave such matters behind. But trouble, like the storm outside, had a way of finding them. The clock on the mantel chimed 9. The stranger groaned faintly, his eyes flickering open for a moment. Tuppence bent near. Who knows our names? Tell us. But the man's gaze was clouded, lost in some other place. His lips moved, forming a word Tuppence could not catch, before he drifted back into unconsciousness. The doorbell rang again, this time in a brisk, businesslike tone. Dr. Harding, coat dripping, stomped into the sitting room with the air of a man pulled unwillingly from his supper. Well, what's all this? He said, dropping his bag onto the table. You've dragged me through the devil's own weather for some tramp. He's no tramp, Tuppence said firmly. Look at his clothes. Clothes don't save lives, Harding muttered, kneeling to examine the patient. He checked pulse and eyes, muttering all the while. Exhaustion, exposure, possibly fever. Nothing unusual. He'll sleep and likely recover, unless of course he doesn't. Tuppence disliked the man's clinical indifference, but she held her tongue. Harding produced a vial, administered a dose, and stood. Keep him warm. If he lives till morning, he may live altogether. Otherwise, well, you've done what you could. Good evening. And with that, the doctor swept out, leaving more questions than comfort. The fire hissed, rain battered the glass. The stranger lay motionless, his hand tight around that little leather book. Tuppence looked at her husband. Tommy, I can feel it. This isn't accident. This is the beginning of something. Tommy drew the blanket higher around the man's shoulders. Then, old girl, I dare say we'd best be ready for it. Fritz hissed once more, staring not at the stranger but at the darkened window, as though sensing eyes beyond the glass. The storm raged on, and the laurels, usually their refuge, had become the doorway to a mystery neither of them yet understood. Morning broke grey and reluctant, as though the storm of the previous night had wrung even the sky dry. At the laurels the fire had burned down to glowing embers, and a faint chill crept through the house. Tuppence, already dressed and brisk with purpose, pushed open the door of the sitting-room. The stranger still lay on the sofa where they had left him, wrapped in their best wool blanket. But his stillness was of another kind now. She crossed quickly, her hand at his shoulder. No stir, no breath. His face, sharp in the cold light, had taken on that unmistakable pallor that was not sleep, but something beyond it. Tuppence's heart sank, though her chin lifted with resolve. "Tommy!" Her husband appeared moments later, hair untidy, collar askew, clutching his dressing-gown around him. "What?" He stopped at the sight. "Oh, Lord!" "Yes," Tuppence said quietly. "He's gone." For a moment, they stood together in silence. The rain had ceased, but the hush in the house felt heavier than the storm had ever been. Dr. Harding returned, this time without complaint about the weather, though his manner was no less curt. He bent over the body, performed a few perfunctory examinations, and straightened with a sigh of professional detachment. "Heart failure," he declared, brushing his hands together. "Not uncommon. Exposure, exhaustion, likely too much strain. You've nothing to reproach yourselves for." "That's convenient," Tuppence remarked, her tone sharper than she intended. Harding gave her a look of mild reproof. "Death is never convenient, Mrs. Beresford, but in this case it is neither suspicious nor preventable." Tommy cleared his throat. "You're quite certain?" "As certain as one can be without a post-mortem." Harding closed his bag. "But I shouldn't advise one. Waste of time. The man was already on the brink." Tuppence's eyes narrowed. She did not believe in waste when it came to human life, nor did she believe in coincidence. Yet the doctor's blandness offered no foothold for protest. When Harding had gone, leaving behind only the faint smell of antiseptic and wet tweed, Tuppence turned to Tommy. "It doesn't fit." "What doesn't?" She gestured to the body. "A man doesn't stagger into our house in the middle of a storm, whisper a warning about our names, clutch a notebook like a talisman, and then simply expire from heart failure. It's too pat." Tommy looked uneasy. Sometimes things are what they seem, old girl. Tuppence shook her head. And sometimes they aren't. The notebook was still in the stranger's grip. They worked together to prise it loose, almost reverent in their effort. It was small, leather-bound, with the wear of many pockets. Most of its pages were sodden, the ink blurred beyond rescue. Only one page remained intact. Tuppence spread it carefully on the writing desk by the window. The morning light, weak though it was, revealed spidery handwriting in a foreign script. Among the words, unfamiliar to both of them, stood a short list of names. None belonged to anyone they knew. Foreign, Tommy mused, and not just the language. These names, Eastern European, perhaps? Possibly, Tuppence murmured. She traced one name with her finger. But why write them down? Why carry them so desperately? Her eyes strayed to the dead man on the sofa. And why us, Tommy? They know your names. What did he mean? Duty or habit compelled them to notify the authorities. Tommy telephoned Scotland Yard, and by late afternoon their old friend Inspector Marriott arrived. He had aged a little since they had last seen him, more grey at the temples, more lines around the mouth, but his eyes were still sharp, his manner brisk. He greeted them with a mixture of fondness and exasperation. Trust the pair of you to find trouble even in your own sitting room. It found us this time, Tuppence said dryly. Marriott bent over the stranger's body, then at the page spread out on the desk. He made notes, though his face betrayed nothing. We'll take charge from here, he said at last. You needn't worry yourselves further. Needn't we? Tommy asked. No. Marriott's gaze flicked between them. You've done your part. Shelter given, doctor summoned, authorities called. Leave the rest to us. It was meant kindly, but the finality in his voice was unmistakable. Just one question, Tuppence ventured. The names, do they mean anything? Marriott's pencil tapped once against his notebook. They might not. Nothing for you to trouble over. That, Tuppence said softly, is not an answer. Marriott looked at her then, eyes steady. Mrs. Beresford, some matters lie better untouched. Take my advice. Put this out of your minds. There are larger games at play than you realize. He snapped his notebook shut, signalling the end of discussion. To anyone else it might have worked, but Tommy and Tuppence had never been anyone else. After Marriott departed with the body, the house felt emptier, stripped of its guest yet haunted by his presence. Tuppence wandered the hall, thinking. That was when she noticed it. Mud. Not much, a faint smear across the tiles near the umbrella stand, but the shape was distinct, a print larger than the stranger's narrow boots. She crouched, comparing them. Different. Tommy! He came and she pointed. See? He frowned. Strange. He came in last night, yes, but these prints don't match. Exactly. Tuppence rose, her eyes bright with the thrill of discovery. Someone else entered, perhaps while we were fetching the doctor. Tommy scratched his head. Or afterward. Could have been Marriott. Marriott wears polished black shoes, not mud-stained boots, Tuppence retorted. And besides, look here. She leaned closer. The scent. Do you smell it? Tommy sniffed reluctantly. Tobacco. Yes, but not your brand. Indeed, the faint aroma lingered. Sharp, spicy, exotic. Not the mellow pipe blend Tommy favoured. Something foreign, unmistakably so. They exchanged a look. This wasn't just a chance death, Tuppence said firmly. Someone was here, watching, perhaps searching, and that means... That we're already in it, Tommy finished, not without a sigh. He tried for humour. We'd better make sure our wills are in order. But his eyes betrayed unease. That evening, as twilight settled and the lamps were lit once more, they sat together by the fire. The notebook lay between them on the table, its foreign words like silent accusations. Fritz the cat padded into the room, pausing by the hall door. He sniffed, tail twitching, ears pricked toward the darkness beyond. Then, with a low growl, he stalked away. Tuppence followed the direction of his gaze. The door was firmly shut, yet she could not shake the sensation that someone had indeed passed through their hall, a shadow, a presence. Tommy poured brandy, his hand steady, his voice matter-of-fact. Marriott told us to keep out of it. Tuppence took her glass, eyes still on the closed door, which of course ensures that we shan't. The fire snapped. The brandy warmed and the storm outside had gone. But within the laurels, the air remained charged with mystery. The stranger's final words echoed still, insistent and unanswered. "They know your names." And Tuppence, resolute as ever, knew that until she discovered who they were, sleep would not come easily to the laurels. The next morning dawned clearer, though no brighter in spirit. The laurels had shed the storm, but Tommy and Tuppence felt its echo in every corner. The stranger was gone, carried away with Marriott's retinue, yet his presence lingered like smoke in the curtains. The notebook, however, remained. Tuppence held it in her handbag as though it were fragile crystal. "We need someone cleverer than us, Tommy. Someone who can make sense of this scribble." Tommy looked doubtful. Most likely gibberish, a lunatic scrawl. But Tuppence's chin tilted upward. Or a code. And if it's a code, we know just the person. The local library stood at the edge of the village green, a solemn stone building with arched windows and doors that seemed to breathe dust and scholarship. It was a place of hushed reverence, where each step on the tiled floor echoed like an indiscretion. Inside, tall shelves rose like sentinels, lined with the spines of wisdom and neglect. The air smelled of leather, ink, and the faint sweetness of old paper. Here they found Mr. Alexander Pettigrew, retired schoolmaster, amateur linguist, and friend to the Beresfords since their earlier escapades. Pettigrew was small, bird-like, with spectacles perched precariously and an enthusiasm that often outpaced his breath. He greeted them with a delighted flutter of hands. "My dear Beresfords, what brings you into this temple of enlightenment? Not novels, surely, though I won't scold if it is." Tuppence smiled warmly. "Something rather more serious, Mr. Pettigrew. We need your expertise." At a corner table beneath the glow of a green-shaded lamp, she drew the notebook page from her bag. Pettigrew bent over it instantly, spectacles slipping to the end of his nose. "My word, this is not ordinary writing. Cyrillic characters, yes, but not quite Russian. Modified, perhaps Serbian, or Bulgarian. Wait. He adjusted his glasses, muttering syllables under his breath. Yes, indeed. Notations, fragmentary phrases. Tommy leaned back in his chair, surveying the cavernous room. Readers bent over books, a librarian moved silently between shelves, and a boy polished brass lamps at the far end. Yet beneath the ordinary hum lay something taut, as though each whisper carried intent. Pettigrew cleared his throat. "There are names here. Likely persons of interest, though I couldn't swear to whom. But this is intriguing." He tapped a line with a trembling finger. Translated roughly, it reads, "The double agent must not survive." Tuppence felt a chill despite the library's warmth. She repeated the words softly. "The double agent must not survive." "Charming sentiment," Tommy said dryly. "That settles it. Our visitor was mixed up in something sticky." "Espionage," Pettigrew whispered, almost gleeful. "Espionage, without a doubt. These are codes, my friends. Look here, the repetition of numbers alongside names. That usually indicates file numbers or cipher keys." "Not smuggling? Not crime?" Tommy asked, clinging briefly to a simpler explanation. Pettigrew shook his head, spectacles glinting. "Too elaborate. This is professional. The man who carried this notebook was involved in matters of the state." One name stood apart from the rest. "Hamilton," Tuppence read aloud. The syllables seemed to echo in the vaulted ceiling. Pettigrew nodded. "Yes, Hamilton. Common enough, yet its placement here is deliberate." Tommy frowned. "Hamilton? Could it be a place rather than a person?" "Possibly. But look, the surrounding context suggests individuals." Pettigrew's eyes gleamed. "Mark me, this is significant." Across the library, a figure stirred. Tommy, glancing idly toward the far shelves, saw him, a man in a grey overcoat, tall, with his collar turned high. He appeared absorbed in the spines of a row of volumes, yet his gaze flicked too often in their direction. Tommy leaned to Tuppence. "We're being watched." Her reply was a whisper. "Where?" "Near history. Grey overcoat." By the time she looked, the man had moved. He disappeared between shelves like mist. Tommy rose casually, stretching as though restless, and strolled after him. He turned a corner, empty aisle, only the dust motes dancing in sunlight. Another corner, nothing. He returned, baffled. "Gone," he muttered. Tuppence's eyes narrowed. Or hiding. The atmosphere shifted. Every shuffle of paper seemed weighted, every cough suspicious. Even Pettigrew grew uneasy, though his delight in the puzzle kept him anchored. "See here," he said, adjusting his notes. "This other phrase, movement at dawn. Perhaps a rendezvous. And this, fascinating, parcel delivered under ivy. Romantic, but deadly, I shouldn't wonder." Tommy forced a smile. "You'll forgive us if we don't share your scholarly enthusiasm, Pettigrew." "Oh, but I do envy you," the old man cried softly. "To be at the heart of such intrigue, it's like stepping into a novel." Tuppence's tone was dry. "I'd prefer to step out of it, if it's all the same." They left the library as dusk gathered, Pettigrew promising to continue deciphering the fragments. The evening air carried a damp chill, the kind that clung to coats and thoughts alike. On the steps, Tuppence paused, glancing back. Through the glass doors she saw a reflection, a shape in grey, watching from within. When she turned fully, the man had vanished again. "Tommy," she said quietly, "we are most definitely being followed." He tucked her arm through his. "Then let's walk as though we've nothing to hide," which, for once, is true. Back at the Laurels, with lamps lit and curtains drawn tight, they reviewed the day's findings, the stranger's dying words, the notebook, Pettigrew's translation, threads of a tapestry they could not yet see. A double agent, Tommy mused. Someone on both sides of the fence, and someone doesn't want him alive. Tuppence nodded. "And the name Hamilton. That, Tommy, is our key." Her eyes were bright, unafraid. "We've stumbled onto something much larger than we imagined. The stranger came to us for a reason. He trusted us, whether by design or by desperation." Tommy poured them both brandy. "Then we'd best not disappoint him." They clinked glasses, the firelight catching the amber liquid. Yet in the quiet that followed, both heard it, the faintest scrape at the garden gate outside, then silence. Tommy set down his glass. "Old girl, I think the game has begun." It was a curious coincidence, or perhaps not, that the very name pulled from the stranger's notebook now appeared embossed in heavy gilt upon an envelope addressed to the Beresfords. Sir Reginald Hamilton, Baronet of Greystone Manor, requested the pleasure of their company at dinner. Tuppence tapped the card thoughtfully, her expression one of both amusement and calculation. "Well, Tommy, if we were waiting for Providence to provide our next step, here it is. Hamilton, clear as day." Tommy, examining the wax seal, gave a low whistle. "I haven't seen Reginald in years. Last I heard he was dabbling in politics and doing rather badly at it. And now, supper invitations." "And a manor house full of secrets, no doubt," Tuppence said. "I do adore how these things arrange themselves." Greystone Manor stood aloof from the village, its long drive winding through clipped hedgerows and ancient oaks. By twilight the house glowed with the golden light of many windows, a beacon against the encroaching dusk. The Beresfords arrived in style, Tommy in his best dinner jacket, Tuppence elegant in sapphire silk. A butler of suitably grave demeanour received them at the door, ushering them into a hall where portraits of stern ancestors glowered down. Lady Hamilton met them first, tall, poised, her gaze sharp enough to cut glass. Her smile was gracious, but her eyes, restless, assessing, took in every detail. "How delightful to see you both," she said, voice smooth as polished marble. "Do forgive Reginald. He is detained with papers as always. The affairs of the realm never quite leave his desk." Tuppence returned the smile, masking her appraisal. Lady Hamilton's handshake was cool, her grip firm. Here was a woman who saw far more than she permitted others to guess. The dining room at Greystone was a stage set for grandeur, gleaming mahogany tables stretching beneath a chandelier, silver polished to a mirror's shine, crystal glasses catching the candlelight. The company gathered there was small but carefully chosen. Colonel Bracknell, a florid man with bristling moustache, already held forth on his campaigns in India, his glass of sherry half empty. His laugh was too loud, his gestures broad, but behind the bluster lay a mind that measured its audience. Beside him sat Miss Lydia Grant, governess by profession, guest by favour of Lady Hamilton. She was young, keen-eyed, with the sort of intelligence that listens more than it speaks. Her plain dress and modest demeanour were offset by the alertness of her gaze, which missed little. Sir Reginald entered last, papers in hand, his stride confident. Age had whitened his hair but not dimmed his presence. He greeted Tommy with hearty warmth. "My dear fellow, by Jove, it's good to see you again," and Mrs. Beresford, charming as ever. Tuppence inclined her head, concealing her scrutiny. This was Hamilton, the name in the notebook. But was he the key, or merely another player? Dinner commenced with all the trappings of civility. Soup, fish, roast and wine flowed, and so did conversation. Colonel Bracknell boomed. "The trouble with this government is they're too soft. Weakness invites danger, mark me." Lady Hamilton countered smoothly. "Strength without discretion is equally fatal, Colonel." Sir Reginald chuckled. "Between the two of you, I dare say the world is well governed." Lydia's quiet voice threaded into the talk. "One must never underestimate the quiet forces at work. Wars may be decided in drawing rooms as often as on battlefields." Tuppence caught Tommy's glance across the table. There was more here than idle chatter. Each remark seemed weighted, carrying double meaning. The subject drifted often to politics, to Europe, to the shadow of war looming closer with every headline, and with each turn of phrase, suspicion deepened. Tuppence busied herself with observation. Sir Reginald, genial though he appeared, was restless, his fingers drumming the table whenever conversation veered toward intelligence. Lady Hamilton's eyes flicked to him often, as though measuring what he revealed. Colonel Bracknell drank steadily, his bluster perhaps concealing more than war stories. Lydia said little, yet her silences were filled with intent. Tommy, meanwhile, played genial guest, encouraging anecdotes and laughing where appropriate, yet storing away each word. It was during the second course, as footmen moved discreetly about, that Tuppence's attention was caught by a small but telling act. One of the guests, she could not see which, for the moment was fleeting, rose quietly under pretence of fetching a handkerchief and slipped into the adjoining study. When they returned minutes later, their hand moved swiftly to their pocket. A letter, Tuppence was certain, had changed possession. After dinner, coffee was served in the drawing-room, where the ladies sat in clusters while the gentlemen attended to brandy and cigars. The atmosphere grew looser, yet the undercurrent remained. Conversations overlapped, laughter rose, but every phrase seemed tinged with tension, as though secrets lay just beneath the varnish. Tuppence seated herself beside Miss Lydia. "You've been with the Hamiltons long?" "A year," Lydia replied. Her voice was low, pleasant, but watchful. "Lady Hamilton is exacting, but fair. Sir Reginald has been generous." "You must have seen a great deal of important matters." Lydia's eyes flickered, then steadied. "I keep to my duties. Observing children leaves one little time for observing politics." Yet her tone carried the faintest note of evasion. Meanwhile, Tommy endured Colonel Bracknell's tales of frontier battles, punctuated by bursts of laughter and ever more brandy. Yet between boasts, the Colonel's gaze grew sharp, as though measuring Tommy's reactions. Sir Reginald, for his part, held court amiably, but his answers were often deflections, steering talk away from sensitive ground. Later, as coats were fetched and carriages readied, Tuppence glanced once more toward the study. Through the half-open door she glimpsed the desk, papers scattered, the ink blotter disturbed, and the faint impression of an envelope gone missing. Her mind ticked swiftly. Someone had taken a letter that evening, unseen by all but her. As they departed into the cool night, Lady Hamilton pressed her hand with a smile that did not warm her eyes. "Do come again soon, Mrs. Beresford. It is always pleasant to have clever company." Clever or dangerous? In the carriage, Tommy exhaled. "Well, old thing, what do you make of it?" Tuppence's eyes gleamed in the dark. "One of them slipped into the study. One of them pocketed a letter, and I intend to know which." The wheels rattled over the drive, carrying them away from Greystone's glowing windows. But the shadows within were far from left behind. Somewhere among that glittering company, the Beresfords knew, lurked the traitor whose hand had already touched their lives, and the game had only just begun. The dinner had ended in a flurry of polite laughter, the clinking of glasses, and the perfunctory bows of footmen drawing back chairs. Yet for all its elegance, the air at Greystone Manor felt charged, like a storm poised above the rooftops, waiting for the first flash. Sir Reginald had risen with jovial thanks to his guests. Lady Hamilton's smile had played upon her lips but not her eyes, and Colonel Bracknell had declared loudly that another brandy would be the making of him. Miss Lydia Grant had drifted quietly into the shadows of the drawing-room, while conversation dissolved into scattered clusters. It was then that Tuppence excused herself. "A breath of air, if no one minds. The rooms here are too splendid to allow one to breathe properly." Her words were met with a polite murmur of agreement. No one thought it remarkable that Mrs. Beresford might stroll in the gardens. Only Tommy, catching her eye, knew better. The night outside was sharp, the chill biting after the warmth of candles and firelight. Moonlight silvered the clipped hedges, the stone balustrades, and the wide gravel paths that curved like ribbons around the manor. Statues stood sentinel in the parterre, their marble forms stark against the darkness, while the fragrance of late roses lingered in the cool air. Tuppence drew her shawl tighter and let her heels crunch softly on the gravel. She had not come merely for air. Her instincts, sharpened by long habit, told her that secrets whispered in gardens often revealed more than speeches in drawing-rooms. She paused near the yew hedge. Voices, low, urgent, drifted on the breeze. Tuppence edged closer, heart quickening. 2 men stood beyond the hedge, their outlines blurred in the shadow, faces hidden by the turn of the moonlight. "The Beresfords," one voice said, clipped, deliberate. "Remove them before the names are revealed," came the reply, gruffer, tinged with drink. Tuppence's breath caught. Remove. The word, though vague, carried a chill that needed no dictionary. She leaned closer, too close. The branch of the hedge snapped faintly beneath her hand. Silence fell instantly beyond it. "Did you hear that?" Tuppence froze. The crunch of shoes on gravel drew nearer. She darted sideways, skirts brushing against the hedge, and slipped into the shadow of a statue, a marble Diana, bow drawn, her stone gaze fierce in the moonlight. Pressing herself against its pedestal, Tuppence scarcely dared to breathe. A man's silhouette appeared at the edge of the path, scanning the garden. His shoulders were broad, his stance military. Bracknell, or Reginald. The figure lingered, listening, then turned back. "Wind," he muttered. "Nothing more." "Perhaps," the other voice replied, "but be careful. They are sharper than they look." Their footsteps receded, swallowed by the gravel walk. Tuppence waited long moments, then slipped back toward the house, pulse racing. Inside, the drawing-room glowed with lamplight and cigar smoke. Colonel Bracknell held forth again, brandy in hand, his laughter booming. Sir Reginald stood by the mantel, papers discreetly tucked into his breast pocket, while Lady Hamilton hovered nearby, her eyes flicking from guest to guest like a falcon on the wing. Lydia sat demurely with her embroidery, though her needle hardly moved. Tommy caught Tuppence's eye the instant she reappeared. She gave the slightest shake of her head, a silent warning that all was not well. He nodded in return, sliding his dessert plate toward him, as though absent-minded. It was then he noticed something odd, a slip of paper, folded small, tucked beneath the rim. With a careful hand, Tommy unfolded it beneath the cover of his napkin. Only 3 words were written in hurried script. "Trust no one." He slipped it into his pocket, his expression unchanged, though his mind burned with questions. Who had placed it there, and why? Later, as carriages were summoned and cloaks distributed, the Beresfords exchanged the usual pleasantries. Yet beneath the smiles and bows lay currents of unease. Lady Hamilton pressed Tuppence's hand warmly. "You must come again soon. It is rare to find company of such perception." "Indeed," Tuppence replied, smiling sweetly, though her thoughts ran otherwise. Colonel Bracknell clapped Tommy on the back. "Good fellow, Beresford. We'll have to talk more of old campaigns, eh?" Tommy murmured assent, though the colonel's joviality rang false in his ears. Sir Reginald saw them to the door, his geniality unshaken. "Safe journey, my friends. The road is dark but straight. Greystone will always welcome you." Always welcome, or never let go. The drive away from the manor was hushed, the sound of the motor car loud against the quiet countryside. Only once they were beyond the gates did Tommy draw the folded note from his pocket. He passed it to Tuppence. Her eyes widened. "Trust no one." "Someone slipped it under my plate," Tommy said. "I couldn't see who." And in the garden, Tuppence's voice dropped. I heard them, Tommy. 2 men. They spoke of us, of removing us, before names are revealed. Tommy whistled softly. Well, that does liven things up. Tuppence's tone was grim. It was no idle chatter. They meant it. He glanced at her. Did you recognize them? She hesitated. The first, measured, deliberate, could have been Reginald, the second, rough, gruff, Bracknell, perhaps, but I cannot swear. Tommy tapped the wheel thoughtfully. So either our genial host or our boisterous colonel, or neither, and someone clever enough to sound like them. And Marriott, Tuppence added, almost reluctantly. Do not forget, he didn't appear tonight, which is odd in itself. Inspector Marriott, Tommy frowned. But he's our ally. Perhaps. Tuppence's eyes were fixed on the dark road, but the note said, Trust no one, and I, for one, intend to obey it. Back at the Laurels, the fire awaited them, warm and reassuring, yet the comfort of home felt altered, like a playhouse suddenly revealed to be the stage of a darker drama. Tommy poured brandy for them both. So, we've narrowed it down, he said lightly. One of 3 gentlemen, Reginald, Bracknell or Marriott, all pleasant dinner companions, all possibly plotting our removal. Tuppence sipped her glass. We mustn't forget Lady Hamilton and Lydia. Women play the game too, sometimes better than men. Tommy grinned. Point taken. That makes 5 suspects. And the 6th? He raised an eyebrow. Tuppence set down her glass. The unknown man in the village library, the shadow in the grey overcoat. He may not be a Greystone guest, but he's clearly part of their chain. He too has a hand in this. The fire snapped, throwing sparks upward. Outside, the garden lay in silence, its statues watchful in the moonlight. Tuppence leaned forward, her eyes gleaming. Tommy, we are in the middle of it now. No more speculation from the sidelines. This is a game of masks and knives, and if we aren't careful, one of those knives will find us. Tommy raised his glass in salute, his tone half wry, half serious. Then let's play the game better than they do. The clock chimed midnight, and in the shadows beyond the curtained window something moved, silent, unseen. The Beresfords were not alone. Back inside the Laurels, the fire took again, throwing uneasy light across the room. They locked the door, checked the windows, and said little. Outside, something moved, silent, unseen. Tommy and Tuppence returned late, wearied from the Hamiltons' dinner, the whispered dangers in the garden still taut upon their nerves. Fritz padded ahead of them down the hall, tail stiff, pausing now and then to sniff as though confirming that the house remained their own. Tommy shut the door firmly, turning the key with deliberate care. There, if assassins come calling, they'll have to knock politely. Tuppence did not smile. Don't joke, Tommy, they meant it, I heard them. Which makes it all the more imperative that we think clearly. He tugged at his tie, casting it onto a chair, and for clarity, I prescribe brandy and a good fire. The hearth soon glowed, flames licking upward with renewed vigour, as Tuppence leaned forward to place the stranger's notebook upon the low table between them. Its worn leather seemed darker in the flicker of firelight, like an object that carried shadows of its own. We've read it, we've puzzled over it, Tommy said, settling into his chair. But something tells me we've not yet seen all it has to give. Tuppence nodded. Exactly what I was thinking. Pettigrew mentioned invisible inks, lemon juice, heat. Why not try? Tommy raised an eyebrow. Very cloak and dagger of you. Fritz, fetch the lemons. The cat blinked disdainfully and curled up by the hearth. Tuppence vanished into the kitchen and returned triumphant with a lemon from Fritz's basket of groceries. She sliced it, dipped a brush into the juice, and carefully swept it across one of the blank pages. At first, nothing. Then, as she held it close to the fire's warmth, faint letters began to bloom, like ghosts surfacing through water. Both leaned forward, eyes fixed. The letters darkened, arranged themselves into words. One word, one name, stood out with terrible clarity. Marriott. The silence that followed was thick. Tommy was the first to speak, his voice oddly flat. Marriott. Inspector Marriott. Tuppence's breath came quick. It can't be. It mustn't be. Yet there it was, undeniable, written in the stranger's hand, hidden deliberately, preserved for revelation only by firelight. Tommy rose, pacing the rug. Marriott, who's helped us since our first case. Marriott, who's always been blunt, reliable, grumpy as a bear but honest. Tuppence sat very still, staring at the name as though it might rearrange itself into another. Or Marriott, who came to us the night the stranger died, who insisted we leave matters to him. Who could have known we'd find that page? Tommy turned sharply. You think it's true? I think, Tuppence said slowly, that it's dangerous. True or false, it was meant to shake us. He stopped pacing, considering. If it's genuine, we're in deeper than I care to admit. If it's a plant, then someone is playing us with devilish cunning. Either way, Tuppence replied, eyes bright, we cannot confront him. Not yet. Surveillance, Tommy, quiet observation. Let him betray himself or let us prove his innocence. Her voice softened. We owe him that much. Tommy's shoulders eased slightly. Very well. Subtlety it is, though it goes against every bone in my body to doubt the man. An hour bled by in taut quiet. The clock struck 11. Outside, the garden lay silvered under a rising moon. Inside, the fire burned lower, casting long shadows against the walls. Tuppence gathered the notebook, tucking it once more into her bag. We guard this carefully. It may yet cost lives. Agreed. Tommy refilled their glasses. One wonders how many more names might emerge if we had patience to coax them. We'll try again tomorrow. For now. A sound cut her off. The faintest scrape. Not within, but without. Somewhere beyond the curtained window, gravel shifted under a footfall. Tommy's head lifted instantly. He set down his glass, finger to lips. Both moved quietly, deliberately. Tuppence crossed to the lamp and turned it low, plunging the room into half-darkness. Tommy slipped to the window, easing back the curtain just enough to peer through. The garden spread before him in muted silver. Hedges trimmed and orderly, flower beds pale ghosts in the moonlight. At first, nothing stirred. Then, there. A shadow, detached from the others, slipping along the hedge line, too large for a fox, too fluid for mere trick of light. A man. Tommy's jaw tightened. He turned back. Someone's out there. Tuppence's voice was a whisper. Watching? More likely searching. For us or for the notebook. They waited, breath shallow, as the shadow moved slowly toward the French doors. The handle rattled faintly, tested, then released. The figure lingered a moment longer, then drifted away, swallowed by the dark. Only when silence settled again did Tommy exhale. Well, that answers one question, he murmured. We're being hunted, as well as hunting. Tuppence drew the curtains tightly shut. So it seems. And whoever it was, they knew where to look. The garden, the study windows. It wasn't chance. Her hand brushed the bag at her side, the notebook within. They wanted this. Tommy nodded grimly, which means we must keep it safer than ever. Later, upstairs, they prepared for bed with none of their usual lightness. The rooms of the Laurels, once so comfortably theirs, felt like a stage where unseen eyes watched from the wings. Every creak of the timbers, every sigh of wind seemed magnified. Tuppence sat at her dressing table, brushing her hair with measured strokes. In the mirror she caught Tommy's reflection, sitting at the edge of the bed, head bowed in thought. She turned. You're thinking of Marriott? Yes. He lifted his gaze. Of how I'll look him in the eye tomorrow, and wonder. Of how, if it is true, every word he's ever spoken to us was weighted with lies. Tuppence rose, crossed to him, and laid a hand on his shoulder. We must not despair. If he is guilty, we'll prove it. If he is not, then the notebook was meant to divide us from our only ally. Either way, truth will out. He covered her hand with his own. You sound very certain. I am, she said simply. It's the only way to carry on. The house settled around them. The fire downstairs sank to embers. The clocks ticked their steady rhythm, and beyond the walls the night pressed close. Yet neither Tommy nor Tuppence truly slept. Each dreamed half-waking dreams of shadows in the garden, of names written in invisible ink, of friends turned traitor and enemies masked in genial smiles. And sometime near midnight, a whisper of movement stirred again outside the Laurels. The intruder had returned. Tommy woke at once, instinct sharp. He lay still, listening. a faint scrape upon glass, a muffled rustle near the back door. He rose silently, pulling on his dressing gown, motioning Tuppence to remain. She, of course, ignored the instruction and followed, slippered feet quiet on the stairs. Together they crept to the kitchen door. Moonlight slanted through the panes, casting bars of silver upon the flagstones. A figure bent low at the threshold, tools glinting faintly in his hand. He was working at the lock. Tommy's hand closed on the poker from the hearth. "On 3, he breathed. But before he reached 2, the figure straightened abruptly, head turning as though some sixth sense had warned him. In a flash he bolted, vanishing into the night with the swiftness of a hunted animal. Tommy flung open the door, racing a few paces into the garden. But the intruder was gone, swallowed by hedge and moonlight. He returned, breathing hard, frustration etched on his face. Too quick, he knew what he was about. Tuppence closed the door firmly, sliding the bolt. "And now we know, too. They will stop at nothing. We're not merely pawns in this game, we're targets." Tommy set the poker aside. "Then we'll play it better. Marriott or not, Hamilton or Bracknell, Lady Hamilton or Lydia, whoever wears the mask, will strip it away." She looked at him in the firelight, her face calm but resolute. "And survive in the process." "Precisely," he said, with a grim smile. The clock struck 1. The garden lay silent once more, but the shadow of danger lingered. Within the laurels, 2 determined figures sat by the fading fire, notebook between them, courage unshaken. The name on the page burned in their minds. Marriott. Whether truth or trick, ally or enemy, the game had shifted, and the Beresfords knew, as the embers glowed faintly in the dark, that the hunt was now running both ways. The following Saturday dawned with a brightness so ordinary it might have belonged to another world entirely. Sunshine streamed across the village green, catching the colours of bunting that fluttered from stall to stall. Children squealed over coconut shies, the brass band struggled gallantly through a march, and the scent of toffee and roasting chestnuts hung in the warm air. To any casual eye, the fete was innocence itself. But to Tommy and Tuppence Beresford, walking arm in arm past stalls laden with jam jars and second-hand books, it was a battlefield in disguise. "Almost too perfect," Tommy murmured. "If you were planning mischief, you couldn't choose a better cover. Half the county here, everyone too busy with raffles and tombolas to notice a handoff beneath their noses." "And everyone's faces painted with cheer," Tuppence replied, "which makes it harder to tell which are masks and which are genuine." She adjusted her hat, scanning the crowd with keen eyes. "Let's divide and conquer. You take the games, I'll take the stalls." Tommy grinned. As in matrimony, so in espionage. At the hoopla stall, Tommy watched a farmer exchange a halfpenny for 3 rings, his hands clumsy from honest labour. Nothing suspicious there. But a moment later, a man with a city coat and polished shoes approached, not the sort one expected at a country fete. He tossed his rings without care, missing each time, then accepted a paper bag of humbugs as his consolation prize. Yet when he walked away, Tommy noticed the bag change hands twice more in quick succession, passing finally to a young messenger boy who slipped it into his satchel and vanished into the crowd. Tommy's eyes narrowed. A courier, without a doubt. Meanwhile, Tuppence lingered by the jam stall. A local woman in an apron beamed as she sold jars of marmalade to a string of customers. But between one sale and the next, Tuppence observed a subtle signal. The vendor tapped twice on the counter, slid a wrapped sweet across, and the recipient, an otherwise respectable churchwarden, palmed it before strolling off without a word. "Curious," Tuppence murmured, pretending interest in the gooseberry jam. A little further along, the raffle stall did brisk trade. Tickets fluttered from a drum, numbers were shouted, and prizes displayed. China teapots, knitted scarves, a ham wrapped in cloth. It was all perfectly ordinary, except that each exchange of ticket and coin seemed to carry a weight beyond chance. Tuppence purchased a strip, smiling sweetly as she tucked them into her handbag. "One never knows when a lucky number will come up," she said aloud, though her thoughts ran otherwise. By noon, the Beresfords met near the bandstand, comparing notes over cups of weak tea. "Definitely a courier," Tommy reported. "Polished shoes, city accent. The humbugs were a blind." "And jam," Tuppence countered. "Or sweets. The stall holders are part of it. passing more than preserves. She leaned closer, lowering her voice. And the raffle, that's the hub. I'd swear on it. The way they handled the tickets, it wasn't chance. Something's being passed. Tommy stirred his tea thoughtfully. Then we watched the raffle. The afternoon crowd thickened. Bunting snapped in the breeze, music blared slightly flat, and laughter rang from the coconut shy. Yet beneath the merriment lay a thrum of tension, at least for 2 observers. The raffle drum spun, tickets pulled, numbers shouted. Winners came and went, clutching hams and tea sets. But to Tuppence's sharp eye, one exchange stood out. A folded note, slipped between ticket and coin, passed into the raffle master's hand. He pocketed it without pause, smiling broadly as he called the next number. Tuppence moved at once. "I'll take the next strip of tickets, if you please." The man obliged, distracted by the clamour of winners. Tuppence, with deft fingers, intercepted the folded paper as she accepted her strip. She tucked it quickly into her handbag before anyone noticed. Her pulse quickened. When at last she and Tommy found a quiet corner near the fortune-teller's tent, she withdrew the note. One line, hastily scrawled, stared back at them. "Deliver the list tonight." Tommy let out a low whistle, short but not sweet, and exactly what we feared. "Which means," Tuppence said, folding it carefully, "that the traitor is still at work, and tonight something decisive will happen." Yet even as the discovery thrilled and chilled them, another thread wove itself into the tapestry. Miss Lydia Grant. Tuppence spotted her on the far side of the green, half hidden by the fortune-teller's tent. Lydia's plain dress and modest bonnet should have rendered her invisible, but she carried a wicker basket, and her manner, furtive glances, sudden changes of direction, spoke of unease. "Tommy," Tuppence murmured, nodding toward her. He followed her gaze. "Well, well, Miss Grant, governess extraordinaire, out shopping with a guilty conscience." "She's slipping away." Indeed, Lydia disappeared into the crowd, basket clutched tightly. "Do we follow?" Tommy asked. Tuppence hesitated. "Not yet. She may be innocent, or merely another red herring. For now we hold to the central thread, the list, and tonight." The fate wound toward evening. The band played its last tune, prizes were claimed, and villagers departed with weary cheer. Stalls were dismantled, bunting gathered, and the green returned to quiet. The Beresfords lingered, watching the last stragglers. The raffle master, sweating and jovial, packed his drum into a cart. The sweet seller carried boxes back to a van. The courier, polished shoes now dusty, disappeared down a lane, all outwardly innocent. Yet the note in Tuppence's handbag told another story. Tommy slipped his arm through hers. "Come on, old girl. We've seen enough. Tonight the trap will spring, and we must be there when it does." Back at the Laurels, twilight deepened into night. The fire was lit once more, its glow steady against the darkening windows. Tuppence unfolded the note again, laying it on the table. "Deliver the list tonight." She tapped it with her finger. "This, Tommy, is the crux. The stranger died for it. Men in gardens whisper of it. And now we have proof that tonight is the appointed hour." Tommy nodded grimly. "Then our course is clear. We shadow whoever makes that delivery, follow the thread to its end." "Easier said than done," Tuppence replied. "We don't yet know who carries the list." "True," Tommy admitted, "but we know where to look. Hamilton, Bracknell, Lady Hamilton, Lydia, even Marriott, damn it, one of them holds it. Tonight, we'll find which." A knock sounded suddenly at the door. Both froze. Tommy moved cautiously, opening it just a crack. Only a boy stood there, cap in hand, holding out a basket of bread. "From the baker, sir. Mrs. Beresford's order." Tommy paid him, relieved, shutting the door firmly. Yet when Tuppence checked the basket, beneath the rolls lay an envelope, addressed in bold, unfamiliar hand. "Beware the one you trust most." They exchanged a long look. The fate's laughter might have faded, but its shadows stretched into the night. The clock chimed 9. Beyond the windows the village slept, or pretended to. Somewhere out there, under bunting packed away and lanterns extinguished, the game of false faces continued. And tonight the Beresfords would play their part. The plan had been Tuppence's. Tommy, though reluctant, admitted it had the ring of sound strategy. When one cannot uncover the truth, one can always tempt it to reveal itself. And so the forged list was created, written in Tuppence's neat hand, disguised as the stranger's spidery script, and made to look convincingly aged by a little lemon juice, ash, and careful folding. It bore names drawn from old newspapers and novels, none with real significance, but enough to pass muster under a hasty glance. "This," Tuppence declared, slipping it into Tommy's breast pocket, "is our cheese. Now let's see which mouse comes for it." Tommy grumbled. "Let's hope this mouse doesn't bite too hard." Greystone Manor loomed once more before them, lit against the dusk like a theatre awaiting its players. Inside, the air was warm with lamplight and the scent of polish and cigars. Sir Reginald greeted them with expansive charm. "Beresfords, capital that you could come again so soon. One never has too much clever company." Lady Hamilton stood a pace behind, her smile gracious, though her eyes flicked quick and sharp to the line of Tommy's jacket, where the false list rested. Colonel Bracknell was already ensconced by the fire, red-faced and jovial, a glass in hand. "Beresford," he boomed. "Come in, man, come in." And Mrs. Beresford, radiant as always, "You'll cheer an old soldier's evening." Miss Lydia Grant, quiet as ever, slipped forward with a shy nod, her hands folded primly. Yet her gaze, when it rested on Tuppence, seemed thoughtful, almost troubled. The evening unfolded with apparent gaiety. Silver trays circulated with wine and canapes, conversation sparkled, laughter rose. Yet beneath it all, tension simmered, palpable as the heat from the hearth. Tommy felt the weight of the paper in his pocket as though it were a stone. He laughed at Colonel Bracknell's anecdotes, nodded at Sir Reginald's pronouncements on trade, but his mind circled one question. Who among them would try to take it? Tuppence, more discreet, let her eyes wander. Lady Hamilton's smile faltered now and then, as though some private anxiety gnawed at her composure. Lydia, though silent, seemed to watch the guests as carefully as Tuppence did herself. Bracknell drank heavily, sweat shining on his brow despite the coolness of the hall. And Sir Reginald, genial, hearty, attentive, was perhaps too careful in steering the conversation away from politics whenever it threatened to grow serious. It happened quickly, almost imperceptibly. A footman bent to offer a tray. Tommy reached for a glass, and in the same instant felt a subtle tug at his pocket. He turned at once. Nothing. The list was still there, but he had felt it, unmistakably. Someone had tested his guard. His eyes swept the company. The footman's face was bland, expressionless. Bracknell laughed too loudly at his own joke. Lady Hamilton stirred her glass with unnecessary attention. Lydia lowered her gaze, cheeks faintly flushed. Tommy said nothing, only adjusted his jacket and carried on, but his heart beat faster. The mouse was circling the cheese. At 9:30, a new arrival unsettled the gathering. Inspector Marriott. He entered without preamble, his overcoat still damp with drizzle, his expression more dour than usual. "Evening, Lady Hamilton. Reginald, Colonel." His eyes flicked to Tommy and Tuppence. "Beresfords, didn't expect to find you here?" "And we you," Tommy replied, keeping his tone light. "Policing country dinners now, Marriott?" Marriott's scowl deepened. "I might ask the same of you. What business have you here?" Sir Reginald interjected smoothly. "Come now, Inspector, don't bristle. You're welcome, of course. We are all friends here." But the words rang oddly, as though friendship were precisely what was lacking. Tuppence watched Marriott closely. He seemed weary, strained, his usual brusque confidence replaced by something more cautious. Was it guilt, or simply the burden of knowledge unshared? The evening grew taut. Conversation faltered, then resumed with forced vigour. Guests laughed, but their eyes strayed to Tommy's jacket, to the false list no one had seen but all seemed to sense. At one point, Lady Hamilton excused herself, slipping into the study. She returned moments later, her composure intact, though her hands trembled slightly as she lifted her glass. Colonel Bracknell drank faster, mopping his brow, his joviality crumbling at the edges. Miss Lydia moved quietly about, assisting with coffee, her basket near at hand. Once Tuppence caught her glancing toward Tommy's pocket, quickly averting her gaze when their eyes met. Marriott prowled the room like a restless hound, eyes sharp, saying little. "Someone in this room slipped a note beneath my plate before the lights failed," Tommy said mildly. "I felt the hand. Then the room went dark." And then the house went dark. A sudden snap, A gasp from the lamps, and the great hall plunged into blackness. Only the fire on the hearth cast a faint glow, flickering wildly across startled faces. "Confound it!" Colonel Bracknell barked. "The fuses!" Voices rose in confusion, chairs scraped, glasses toppled. In the dark, footsteps scuffed hastily. A muffled cry rang out, followed by the sound of a struggle. Tuppence clutched Tommy's arm. "Hold fast, Tommy!" But even as she spoke, Tommy felt it. The paper wrenched from his pocket. He lunged blindly, grasping at an arm, but the figure twisted free. Another voice shouted, "Stop him!" But the words were swallowed by chaos. A crash, the slam of a door, and then silence. Moments later, lights flickered back, sputtering to life. Guests blinked, dishevelled, faces pale, and the list, false though it was gone. Tommy stood in the centre of the room, breathing hard, his pocket empty. Colonel Bracknell mopped his brow furiously. Dashed inconvenience. Anyone could have slipped away in the dark. Lady Hamilton's hands shook as she set down her untouched glass. So dreadful. And yet, surely it was only a trifle, a mere accident. Miss Lydia's face was pale, her eyes wide. She murmured softly, "Accidents seldom happen at such precise moments." Inspector Marriott strode forward, his gaze sharp. "What was taken, Beresford?" Tommy hesitated. Tuppence answered instead, voice calm but pointed. "A list of names." Marriott's face hardened. "Where did you get it?" "That," Tuppence replied, "is precisely the question." The guests exchanged glances, suspicion hanging in the air like smoke. No one admitted to seeing who had taken the paper. No one confessed to being near Tommy at the crucial moment. Each face betrayed only anxiety, or the performance of innocence. Sir Reginald raised his hands for calm. "Let us not leap to accusations. The power failed, confusion reigned, we must be rational." But rationality was scarce. Tommy scanned the room. Lady Hamilton's composure was cracked, her gaze darting nervously. Bracknell sweated profusely, muttering to himself. Lydia seemed near tears, though her eyes darted often to Marriott as though seeking reassurance or fearing him. And Marriott himself stood rigid, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. The trap had been sprung, but the mouse, whoever it was, had snatched the cheese and vanished into the dark. Later, as the guests dispersed in uneasy silence, the Beresfords lingered. Lady Hamilton, pale but polite, bid them good night with cool formality. Sir Reginald pressed Tommy's hand warmly, but his eyes slid away too quickly. Colonel Bracknell staggered to his carriage, his laughter forced, sweat dripping down his collar. Lydia slipped out quietly, clutching her basket. Marriott offered no farewell, only a curt nod before striding into the night. At last, alone in their own motor car, Tommy and Tuppence exchanged glances, heavy with meaning. "Well," Tommy said grimly, "the trap tightened indeed, and the rat took the bait." "But which rat?" Tuppence asked softly. Tommy gripped the wheel. "That, old girl, is the devil of it. We know less than before." Tuppence's eyes gleamed. "Not less. We know our enemy is desperate enough to risk exposure. And desperation, Tommy, always leaves traces." The car rattled away from Greystone Manor, headlights piercing the dark lanes. Behind them the grand house stood silent once more, its shadows deeper, its secrets closer than ever. And in the Beresfords' minds, one certainty rang clear. The double agent was among them, and the game was drawing tighter with every move. Dawn crept pale and reluctant over Greystone Manor, its first lights slipping between heavy drapes and across the polished floors. The night before had left a residue of unease that no morning brightness could dispel. The house, usually so stately, felt hollowed, as if its very timbers remembered the darkness and the scuffle, the theft of the list. Tommy and Tuppence had returned at first light to Greystone at Marriott's request. They had slept little at the Laurels. Lady Hamilton had insisted, "The hour is late, the road's treacherous. You'll be more comfortable here." Comfortable, perhaps, but not restful. They had slept little, lying awake with thoughts darting like moths in candlelight. It was Tuppence who woke first. The house was still, the air heavy. She slipped into her dressing gown and padded to the window, where mist clung low across the lawns. Somewhere within the silence a sound cracked like a muffled shot, or so her imagination told her. She turned sharply, heart racing, but no sound followed, only the distant crow of a cock. She shook Tommy awake. "Something's wrong." He blinked, groaned, and swung his legs out of bed. "Everything's been wrong since the day that fellow staggered into our hall. Be specific, old girl." "I heard something. Like a shot. Downstairs." Tommy rubbed his eyes, but the look he gave her was sharp. "Then we'd best see to it." The corridors of Greystone were hushed, carpets muffling their steps. A grandfather clock chimed 6, its tone solemn. As they descended the staircase, a footman passed in haste, face pale, whispering to another servant. "What is it?" Tommy demanded. The footman hesitated, then blurted, "Colonel Bracknell, sir. He's—" His voice broke. "In the study." Tommy and Tuppence exchanged a grim look and pushed forward. The study was a masculine chamber, all dark wood and heavy curtains, the scent of tobacco thick in the air. Books lined the shelves, ledgers stacked neatly on the desk. But the order ended there. Colonel Bracknell lay sprawled upon the rug, his great frame oddly shrunken in death. A pistol had fallen from his slack hand, though the wound at his chest left no doubt the weapon had been turned upon him, or by him. Blood had spread darkly across his waistcoat, seeping into the fibres of the carpet. Lady Hamilton stood near the desk, white-faced but composed, one hand pressed to her throat. Sir Reginald loomed by the hearth, grim, while Inspector Marriott crouched over the body, his face lined and unreadable. "Shot at close range," Marriott announced without looking up. "Death instantaneous." "Good Lord," Tommy muttered. Tuppence's eyes swept the room. Disorder caught her gaze. A cufflink near the hearth, gleaming oddly out of place. Ashes in the grate where a letter had been burned but not entirely consumed. And on the desk, a diary open to yesterday's page, with a neat line, ink still tacky in the fibres, scrawled, "Meeting at 11 with R." Marriott rose, dusting his hands. "The case is clear enough. Bracknell was the traitor. Last night proved it. When the forgery was discovered, he knew the game was up. He took his own life rather than face exposure." Tuppence's voice was quiet but firm, or he was silenced. All eyes turned to her. She gestured toward the diary. Why write of a meeting if he meant to die? And why in such vagueness R? That could be anyone. Sir Reginald bristled. "Really, Mrs. Beresford, must you spin conspiracy where plain fact will do?" "Plain fact?" Tuppence moved to the grate, carefully drawing out the charred remains of the letter. "A man shot, a diary note, a half-burned page. These are not plain, they are deliberate. Someone wished us to believe Bracknell guilty." Marriott's expression darkened. "Be careful, Mrs. Beresford. You trespass on dangerous ground." She met his eyes evenly. "Dangerous ground is where we have stood since the beginning." The cufflink lay gleaming near the hearth. Tuppence picked it up delicately, examining the crest engraved upon it. Her gaze flicked to Sir Reginald's sleeve. "Curious," she said softly. "This matches yours, Sir Reginald." His jaw tightened. "Impossible. I've a full set. That must have been Bracknell's." "But Bracknell wore none last night," Tuppence returned. "I noticed. He'd lost them," he said, cursed himself for it. The silence stretched, thick with implication. Lady Hamilton broke it, her voice taut. "Really? Must we exchange accusations before breakfast? A man lies dead." "Yes," Tuppence said, eyes never leaving Sir Reginald. "A man lies dead, and the truth lies with him." Later, as servants carried the body away, the guests gathered in strained silence. Marriott remained resolute. "Bracknell was our man," he said. "He sweated last night like a guilty beast. He drank to mask his fear. And now, this. It fits." Tommy frowned. Too neatly, perhaps. But Marriott was unyielding. "You're clever, Beresford, but don't overcomplicate matters. Treachery is seldom elaborate. Bracknell cracked under pressure, that's all." Tuppence interjected softly. "Or someone knew we had set a trap and needed a scapegoat, and Bracknell was convenient." Her words hung in the air, unanswered. Tommy and Tuppence slipped away to the garden for air. The mist still clung low, the hedges beaded with dew. Tommy exhaled hard. "Well, that's torn it. One suspect removed, and in a manner that muddies the waters further." "Exactly," Tuppence replied. "Think, Tommy. If Bracknell were guilty, why kill himself now when he had seized the list? Unless he never had it." Tommy nodded slowly. "And the diary. Meeting at 11 with R. That could point to Reginald himself. Or it could have been planted after his death. Tommy gave a half smile. "Old girl, you have a suspicious mind." "And it has saved us more than once," she answered. They returned to the study once more when the others had dispersed. The room bore its scars of tragedy, the bloodstain upon the rug, the faint scent of cordite. Tuppence crouched by the grate, examining the half-burned letter again. Words emerged faintly. Shipment, names, secure. She looked up. This was no suicide note. It was evidence someone destroyed it hastily. Tommy frowned. And left it half-burned? Careless. Or hurried, Tuppence corrected. Interruption, perhaps. Her eyes strayed to the door. Someone walked in at the wrong moment. At luncheon, the atmosphere was strained. Conversation faltered. Every glance carried suspicion. Lady Hamilton spoke little, her eyes darting often to her husband. Sir Reginald maintained his genial facade, but his hand trembled slightly as he carved the roast. Lydia Grant looked pale, almost ill, excusing herself after only a few bites. Marriott, grim as ever, barely touched his plate. When the meal ended, he drew Tommy aside. "You and your wife are meddling too far. Let the yard conclude its work." Tommy's tone was mild. "And have we concluded anything? Bracknell's dead, but the danger remains. Someone still watches Marriott. Someone still hunts." Marriott's jaw worked. He said nothing, only stalked away. That evening, as they prepared to leave Greystone, Tuppence paused in the hall, staring back toward the study door. Tommy touched her arm. "Still doubting?" She nodded. "More than ever." The phrase the stranger spoke, "They know your names," still rings in my ears. If Bracknell were the double agent, what need to involve us at all? No, someone else wears the mask. Someone alive. Tommy met her gaze. "Then we keep digging, old girl, until the mask slips." They stepped into the cool night, the manor looming behind them like a stage set, its curtains half drawn. Somewhere within its walls, or its circle of friends, the double agent waited, closer than ever. And now, with blood on the carpet, the game had turned deadlier still. By the time the clock neared midnight, the laurels looked solemn. The fire had sunk low in the grate, the lamps were trimmed, and the grandfather clock ticked heavily toward midnight. Rain lashed against the panes, a restless accompaniment to the gathering storm within. Tommy and Tuppence had summoned them all, Sir Reginald Hamilton, Lady Hamilton, Miss Lydia Grant, and Inspector Marriott. Even the servants had been sent away, leaving the sitting-room taut with expectation, the air thick with tobacco smoke and unspoken words. Tuppence, seated near the hearth, her sapphire eyes sharp, glanced once at the notebook upon the table. It had begun here, with a dying stranger, a whispered warning, and a name scrawled in desperation. Now the circle was nearly complete. Tommy stood by the mantel, hands clasped behind his back, voice level. "We've asked you here because the time has come to settle this business. Too long it has lingered in shadows. Tonight we bring it into the light." The clock chimed the quarter. Every face reflected unease. Sir Reginald leaned forward, attempting a bluff joviality. "My dear fellow, isn't all this a bit melodramatic? Surely the yard is equipped to tidy matters without theatricals." Tuppence's gaze never wavered. "And yet theatricals have served our enemy well. Masks, deceptions, misdirection. Tonight we strip them away." Lady Hamilton's hand, gloved even indoors, tapped restlessly against her knee. "If you have accusations, Mrs. Beresford, better to make them plain than cloak them in performance." "Accusations?" Tommy echoed. "No, deductions and evidence." He drew a breath. "Let us begin at the beginning, when a stranger staggered into this very house and gasped his final words, 'They know your names.' That phrase set the tone. Someone close to us, someone within our circle, was watching, waiting. He moved toward the table, gesturing to the notebook. From his effects we found names, Hamilton among them. Then, through invisible ink, another name emerged, Marriott, designed to sow distrust, to set allies at each other's throats. Inspector Marriott shifted, his brow furrowing. "I told you at the time, it could have been planted." "Precisely," Tuppence said smoothly. "And it was. Because that is what our enemy excels at, Division, misdirection, scattering suspicion like crumbs before gullible birds. Bracknell's death was the same, a convenient scapegoat. Too convenient. Sir Reginald bristled. The man was guilty as sin. His diary proved it. Tommy's voice hardened. Did it? A vague entry, meeting at 11 with R. Any hand could have scrawled that after his death. And the burned letter, destroyed in haste but not completely. Why? Because its true contents would have exonerated him. Tuppence's eyes swept the room, her tone calm but edged. Let us examine each of you in turn. She turned first to Marriott. Inspector, your name appeared in the notebook, yes, and you arrived unbidden, prowled like a hound, ever pressing us to step back. Suspicious, certainly, but your flaw is precisely that. You are too blunt, too direct. If you were the double agent, the ruse would be far subtler. No, your name was planted to drive a wedge between us and the Yard. Marriott's jaw tightened, but relief flickered in his eyes. Miss Lydia, Tuppence continued, you lurk in the corners, quiet, observant. We saw you slip away with baskets, whisper with servants. Easy to paint you as a courier, yet your secret is simpler. You are in love. Lydia flushed scarlet. With Sir Reginald's secretary, I dare say, Tuppence pressed gently. Your stolen moments were romantic, not treasonous. That leaves you innocent, if somewhat imprudent. Lydia lowered her gaze, shoulders trembling, but the tension in her frame eased. Tommy turned to Sir Reginald. And you, a man of prominence, a name in the notebook, a cuff-link in the study where Bracknell fell. Suspicious indeed, but your guilt lies more in pride and blindness than betrayal. You feared scandal more than truth, and that made you vulnerable, but not guilty. Sir Reginald sputtered, half rising. You insult me, Beresford. No, Tommy said evenly. I absolve you. Your weaknesses are many, but treason is not among them. At last, all eyes turned to Lady Hamilton. She sat poised, back straight, chin lifted, every inch the grande dame. Yet the faintest quiver in her hand betrayed her. Tuppence's voice was quiet, deliberate. Which leaves only you, Lady Hamilton. Silence pressed heavy. The rain hammered at the windows, and the clock ticked inexorably toward midnight. Lady Hamilton laughed softly, brittle as glass. How absurd! Because I keep a tidy house and a gracious table, you would paint me a villainess? No, Tuppence said, her eyes gleaming, because you smoke Turkish tobacco. The words fell like stones into still water. Tommy leaned forward. The night the stranger collapsed in our hall, the air reeked of it. Not Tommy's brand, not Bracknell's pipe, not Marriott's plain English blend. Turkish tobacco, a mark as distinct as a fingerprint, and only one among us is known to indulge. Lady Hamilton's face paled, then hardened. A hostess may enjoy a private vice without condemnation. Perhaps, Tuppence said, but not when that scent hangs over a dying man's body. You were there, you silenced him, and ever since you've sought to direct suspicion elsewhere. The clock began its solemn tolling. 11, 12. Tuppence rose, voice clear. At the stroke of midnight, the mask falls. Lady Hamilton, you are the double agent. The words hung in the air, each chime of the clock underscoring them. For a heartbeat, Lady Hamilton did not move. Then, with a sudden cry, she leapt to her feet, eyes blazing, hands clutching for the notebook upon the table. Tommy lunged to intercept her, but she twisted with surprising strength, striking out with a candlestick. The lamp crashed, plunging the room into half-darkness. "Stop her!" Marriott bellowed, surging forward. Lady Hamilton darted for the French doors, skirts flying. Tuppence sprang in pursuit, catching her arm. The two women struggled, the notebook slipping, scattering pages across the carpet. Lady Hamilton clawed like a cornered cat, desperate, savage. Tommy joined the fray, pinning her wrists. "Enough, Lady Hamilton, it's over!" But she fought still, eyes wild. "Fools! You think you've won? Others wait. The names will out. England is riddled with traitors." Her words ended in a gasp as the door burst open and constables rushed in, summoned by Marriott in anticipation of just such an outburst. They seized her, holding her fast despite her thrashing. At last she sagged, her fury spent, her face pale and drawn. Marriott straightened, breathing hard. "You've done well, Beresfords. Better than I gave you credit for. We suspected Lady Hamilton for months, but never had proof. Now, thanks to you, we do. Sir Reginald sank into a chair, ashen. My own wife. Good God, how blind I've been. Lydia, tears streaming, covered her face. Tommy placed a hand on Reginald's shoulder. She fooled us all, Sir Reginald. That was her strength. The perfect hostess, the loyal wife, while feeding secrets to the enemy. Tuppence knelt, gathering the scattered pages. She held up the notebook, its last secret revealed. The stranger gave his life to deliver this. Now we know why. Lady Hamilton was led away, still muttering, her dignity gone. The door closed upon her, leaving the sitting room drained of its tension, though not of its sorrow. Silence reigned until at last Tuppence spoke. It is finished. The names are safe. The traitor is unmasked. Tommy gave a weary smile. And we've lived to tell the tale. Marriott managed a grim chuckle. Barely. He looked at the Beresfords with something like respect. Perhaps I owe you both an apology. I told you to keep out, yet it seems you are in deeper than I imagined. England owes you a debt. Tuppence inclined her head. Just promise next time that you'll smoke less ordinary tobacco. We can't afford another red herring. Tommy laughed, the sound breaking the gloom. The fire burned low, the storm outside easing at last. The clock ticked on, indifferent to treachery and triumph alike. Tommy poured 2 glasses of brandy, handing one to Tuppence. Well, old girl, here's to another narrow escape. She raised her glass, eyes glinting in the firelight. To masks removed and to truth. They drank side by side as the embers glowed and the long night at the Laurels drew to its close. The morning after Lady Hamilton's arrest dawned grey and listless, as though the weather itself had chosen mourning attire. Mist hung low across the hedgerows, softening the outlines of Greystone Manor. Once it had seemed imposing, even splendid. Now it loomed heavy and exhausted, a grand house hollowed by betrayal. Inside, the atmosphere was subdued. Servants moved like wraiths, their footsteps muted, their voices hushed. The clink of china at breakfast sounded strangely loud in the silence. Sir Reginald sat at the head of the long table, staring into his untouched coffee. His hand trembled faintly as he tried to lift the cup, then set it down again. Miss Lydia Grant sat beside him, her eyes swollen from tears. She had removed her governess's neat bonnet, her hair slightly disordered, as though the night's revelations had shaken her very composure. Tommy and Tuppence had remained at the Laurels overnight, but Marriott had sent word early that they were wanted back at Greystone. Now they sat opposite the Hamilton household, the fire casting flickering light on weary faces. It was Inspector Marriott who finally broke the silence. He stood by the hearth, his hands clasped behind him, his voice steady but grave. You both deserve an explanation, he said, looking at Tommy and Tuppence. You've been in the thick of this business from the start. Too much so, in fact. Tommy raised an eyebrow. Not precisely by choice, Inspector. One doesn't plan for strangers to collapse in one's hall muttering cryptic farewells. Marriott's mouth twitched faintly, though it did not become a smile. No, but it was no accident either. That man knew exactly whose door he was staggering toward. Tuppence leaned forward, eyes intent. Because of us? Yes. Marriott's gaze softened, though the words landed with weight. The dying message. They know your names. It was a warning. He meant that the network Lady Hamilton served had marked you both. Your names, Beresford, are known to them. They've studied your history. More than once you've meddled successfully in matters of intelligence. More than once you've upset their plans. They don't forgive, and they don't forget. A hush followed, broken only by the tick of the clock. Tommy gave a low whistle. So, all along, we weren't merely bystanders who stumbled into a play. We were the target audience. More than that, Marriott said. You were bait, though you didn't know it. The network believed if you were drawn in, you'd chase every thread, and in chasing you might expose something, or lead them to the real quarry. Either way, they meant to use you. Tuppence's lips pressed together. And the stranger, the poor man, he meant to tip the scales back, to give us a fighting chance. Exactly, Marriott said. His notebook was never meant to implicate you, only to steer you toward the truth. But Lady Hamilton seized her opportunity. She doctored, destroyed, manipulated, anything to point blame elsewhere. Sir Reginald stirred, his voice breaking. My wife. A traitor. How could I not have known? His eyes, red-rimmed and bewildered, turned to Marriott. We shared a life, a home, for 20 years. She was gracious, respected. How could it all be a mask? Marriott answered gently, because that is how such people operate, Sir Reginald. They hide in plain sight, weaving their treachery into the very fabric of their charm. It isn't your shame, it is hers. But the old man shook his head, grief consuming him. Lydia reached out timidly, laying her hand over his. He grasped it like a drowning man clutching driftwood. Tommy cleared his throat, practical as ever. And Bracknell? Was he guilty of anything beyond bad table manners and an unfortunate tendency to sweat? Marriott gave a curt shake of his head. The colonel was innocent. Suspicious in appearance, yes. Boisterous, red-faced, quick to drink. But treachery? No. His diary was tampered with after his death. The half-burned letter, the vague scrawl, they were planted to make him the scapegoat. He was silenced because he knew too much, or suspected too closely. He deserved better. Tuppence's face softened. So a loyal man's memory was blackened to cover another's guilt. How fitting that the truth comes clear now. And Miss Lydia? Tommy asked, his tone kinder. Lydia flushed, lowering her eyes. My secret is nothing compared to such matters. I only met George, the secretary, in the garden once or twice. Lady Hamilton disapproved, so I kept it quiet. That was all. I swear it. Tuppence smiled gently. Secrets come in all sizes, Miss Grant. Yours was harmless enough, though ill-timed. You've nothing to reproach yourself for. Lydia's tears spilled again, but this time from relief. Marriott turned back to the Beresfords. You see now why I warned you off. Not because I doubted your competence, but because I knew the danger. This was no mere parlour mystery. It was a European network, ruthless and far-reaching. Lady Hamilton was only one link in the chain, but she was vital, too vital to let slip, and you nearly paid the price for meddling. Tuppence met his gaze without flinching. Perhaps, but had we not meddled, the chain would still hold, and England cannot afford such chains. A pause, then Marriott inclined his head. No, and for that the service is in your debt. The Beresfords left Greystone later that afternoon, the manor receding behind them like a stage set after the curtain had fallen. Its grandeur seemed diminished, its windows dull, its very stones weighed down with secrets that would never wholly be cleansed. In the motor car, the countryside stretched damp and green around them. The storm had passed, but the fields still glistened with rain. Tommy drove in silence for some time, the road winding ahead. At last he said, Strange, isn't it? A house like that, all polish and silver, but underneath, rot. A wife betraying her husband, a household built on lies. Tuppence, gazing out the window, answered softly, All houses have secrets, Tommy. Most are small, some are deadly. That one will never be the same. Back at the Laurels, Fritz the cat greeted them with his usual disdainful yawn, as though espionage and death were trivial distractions from his dinner. The familiar comfort of home wrapped around them, warm and safe. By evening, they sat once more by their own fire, cups of tea steaming, the notebook finally locked away in Marriott's keeping. The tension of the past days eased, replaced by a quiet exhaustion. Tuppence stirred her tea slowly. Do you think, Tommy, that we'll ever quite escape it? Spies, traitors, codes. It seems to find us whether we seek it or not. Tommy chuckled. You make it sound like bad weather. I suppose we're the sort who attract storms. Or who walk into them willingly, Tuppence corrected. Her smile was wry, but her eyes glowed. They sat in companionable silence until Tuppence spoke again, her tone thoughtful. That poor stranger. We never even knew his name, yet he gave his life to warn us. He carried the weight of betrayal to our very door. Tommy raised his cup in a small salute. To the nameless man. His legacy was not wasted. England stands safer for it. Tuppence mirrored the gesture. And to the truth. May it always find its way, however many masks try to hide it. They drank, the firelight flickering across their faces, shadows dancing along the walls. Outside, the storm had passed, leaving only the quiet patter of dripping eaves and the soft sigh of wind through the trees. The danger was over, the double agent unmasked. Yet the world beyond the laurels remained uncertain, shadows shifting just beyond the horizon. And Tommy and Tuppence, though weary, knew in their bones that this would not be the last time secrets found their way to their door. For in a world still trembling on the edge of war, there would always be another mask, another whispered warning, another night when the knock came and the quiet shattered. And when it did, the Beresfords would be ready. The storm had passed. Outside the laurels, the garden glistened under a washed sky. Raindrops jewelled along the rose bushes and dripping steadily from the eaves. A pale light filtered through the curtains, and within, the house had resumed its quiet rhythm. The steady tick of the clock, the faint purr of Fritz the cat, and the soft whistle of the kettle in the kitchen. Peace had returned, though it wore a fragile, fleeting mask. Tommy sat in his armchair, newspaper spread wide, his pipe unlit in his hand. Across from him, Tuppence curled on the sofa, her legs tucked neatly beneath her, the fire warming her face. The air smelled faintly of damp wool and tea leaves, a domestic counterpoint to the intrigue that had so recently occupied their days. "Here we are," Tommy said, rattling the paper. "Page 3, beneath the shipping notices and advertisements for patent tonics. Society hostess arrested on treason charges." He lowered the sheet to glance over the edge at Tuppence. "They don't mince words." "Society hostess," Tuppence repeated with a wry smile. A tidy way of saying she kept a beautiful house, threw splendid dinners, and sold her country in between the soup and the dessert. Tommy grunted. The article makes it sound frightfully matter-of-fact. One could almost imagine it was nothing more serious than failing to pay her club subscriptions. Tuppence's eyes gleamed in the firelight. "That's the way of newspapers, Tommy. Dress treachery in polite phrases so readers can turn the page with their breakfast marmalade undisturbed." He folded the paper and set it aside. "Well, Lady Hamilton won't be disturbing anyone's breakfast again. Marriott saw to that." There was a silence then, filled only by the crackle of the logs. Tuppence leaned forward, her expression thoughtful. "Do you ever wonder, Tommy, why it always seems to come to us? Of all the doors that stranger might have chosen, he staggered to ours. And his words, 'They know your names.' He meant it, you know. Our names are marked now, written somewhere on a list we'll never see." Tommy tamped down his pipe, his brow furrowed. "Yes, it does make a fellow wonder whether we've been altogether too successful for our own good. Once or twice is accident. But this was deliberate." Her smile was wistful. Espionage has a way of creeping back into one's life, even when one has sworn to be sensible. Tommy snorted. "You, sensible? You'd be bored within a week." "Perhaps," she admitted. "But I've learned one thing in all this. The game is never truly over. We win a round, unmask a traitor, tidy the clues, but beyond the horizon someone else is already waiting their turn." The kettle shrieked from the kitchen, sharp against the quiet. Tuppence rose, smoothed her skirt, and went to fetch the teapot. She returned moments later with a tray, the cups clinking cheerfully against their saucers. "Milk?" she asked. "Just a splash," Tommy said, settling deeper into his chair. She poured, the fragrance of strong tea mingling with the fire's warmth. For a moment, they drank in silence, the kind of silence that belonged only to old companions, comfortable, unstrained, rich with unspoken understanding. At length, Tommy said, "It does strike me as curious, though, the name Hamilton. It was in the notebook, yes, but perhaps it was nothing more than chance, a common enough name." Tuppence's eyes narrowed. "Common, yes. Coincidence, no. Too many threads wound through that house to dismiss it. Whatever the stranger meant, he was right. Danger wore the Hamilton crest, whether by blood or by marriage." Fritz leapt onto the hearthrug, stretching luxuriously before curling once more. Tuppence reached down absently to stroke his fur. "Poor Bracknell," she murmured. "He blustered and sweated his way into suspicion, yet he was the only innocent among them. A soldier, loud and foolish perhaps, but loyal." Tommy nodded. "It's often the way. The guilty hide behind charm while the innocent stand out by accident." "And Miss Lydia," Tuppence continued softly, "her secrets were of the heart, not the state. A governess dreaming of romance caught in a web too large for her." "Marriott will see she's looked after," Tommy said. "He's not without kindness beneath the bulldog exterior." Tuppence's smile warmed. "Yes, even bulldogs have their soft moments." The clock chimed the hour, the sound mellow and reassuring. Tommy stretched, placing his empty cup on the tray. Well, old girl, I suppose we may return to normal life for a time. A little gardening, a little bridge, perhaps no more mysterious strangers collapsing in our hall. Tuppence laughed, the sound bright. Normal life? With us? I give it a fortnight at best before the doorbell rings and some absurd adventure tumbles in. Then we shan't open the door, Tommy said firmly. We shall, Tuppence corrected, eyes twinkling. We always do. The fire popped, sending up a shower of sparks. Shadows danced across the room, and for a moment the world outside felt far away. No spies, no traitors, no whispered codes, only the steady heartbeat of home. Tommy leaned back, closing his eyes briefly. You know, Tuppence, there's something rather comforting about ending with tea instead of gunfire. Quite, she agreed. Then, with a mischievous tilt of her head, she added, though if you think this is the end, you're more foolish than I thought. He opened one eye, amused. Oh? And what do you call it, then? The intermission, she said promptly. Fritz yawned extravagantly, unimpressed by espionage or intermissions. Tommy laughed, reached for Tuppence's hand, and squeezed it lightly. Well, whatever it is, I wouldn't face it with anyone else. Her fingers tightened around his. Nor I. The kettle in the kitchen gave one last cheerful whistle as though punctuating her words, and with that the curtain fell on another chapter in the adventures of Tommy and Tuppence Beresford, spies by accident, detectives by habit, and partners in every storm. Tuppence leaned her head against his shoulder, her voice soft but edged with humour. We really must stop inviting spies into our sitting room. Tommy chuckled, the sound rumbling through the quiet house. Yes, but where would be the fun in that? The fire burned low, the storm outside long gone. Peace, fragile but precious, wrapped itself around the laurels once more. And so the tale ended, warmth after danger, laughter after shadows, yet always with the promise that, somewhere beyond tomorrow's horizon, another mystery waited.